Welcome back to The Great Game. In this episode, we got to have a conversation with Rob Grayston from East Midlands Megagames in the UK. Rob was the coordinator, not for the first time, of the International Megagame Survey, which ran at the end of 2023 and collected information from hundreds of people in the megagame community around the world. We cover a lot of ground in this episode. We talk about the kinds of people who come to our events, why people are interested in megagames, what other things that those people do in their lives, and also what we can all do to help grow the hobby. It's really quite in-depth conversation, but all of it's really, really interesting. We had a great time talking to Rob, and I hope that you will enjoy it as well. All of the survey results have been posted in a report that's going live on the Megagame Assembly website if you would prefer to read through them, or you'd like to follow along with us, or dig into some of the details that we didn't get to cover in full. Thanks again to Rob, not only for running the survey and pulling off this gargantuan task, but also for sitting down and talking to us for over 2 hours. With that, I hope you enjoy.
We're here with Rob Grayston, talking about the recent International Megagame Survey. How you doing, Rob?
Bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and ready to talk demographics and preferences.
Beautiful.
Wonderful. Everyone's favorite topics. Why don't you, Rob, for people who don't know, just chat a bit about who you are and, what you're up to in the community and how the survey came about.
All right, well, thank you very much. So my name is Rob, and I am based in Nottinghamshire in the East Midlands in the United Kingdom. So I help run East Midlands Megagames. We didn't have a group around here, so we set that up. I've been megagaming since 2015 or so, and basically I just think that megagames are awesome. So looking at various different ways of doing things as communities develop, as you go from a group of people going, how can we do this best? You end up looking around and going, well, maybe we should get some data on some of this. And in 2019, I put together the first Megagame Survey. We had quite a bit of interest, and that resulted in us going, we've got some various bits and bobs here which we can see, how can we use this? And then the pandemic happened. There was a ticket survey as well, which filled in some of the sides of things along the lines of how much would you be happy to spend? Would it affect you whether this was for profit or if this is just a local megagame group? And I think that was really useful. And I'd like to see that come back, but that's separate from what we're talking about right this second. And yeah, so that's me. I'm a mega gamer who happens to think that data is beautiful, and we should be getting a little bit more to help inform how we can best do games, see if there's anything that we can do better, and effectively make sure that we're just doing a bit of reconnaissance and not missing anything, because sometimes megagame groups don't always talk to each other. People don't always say things in feedback forms. This is entirely anonymous, and hopefully we've captured some useful stuff that will genuinely help whilst also providing some fascinating trivia.
And some amazing graphs.
Well, I'll see if I can polish those a bit, but yeah, let's see if we can do that too.
Some pie charts. We've got lots of pie charts as well.
Lots of pie charts.
The best type of pie.
Rob, before we dive in, I was just wanted to highlight the breadth of this survey. You did send it out far and wide. I remember seeing it on, I remember seeing the previous versions on Facebook before the pandemic, and then more recently it was all across the Discords and the Facebook groups and everywhere. You got a lot of stats from all across the world of all different megagame communities. Do you have any high-level numbers there on just how many respondents there were and where they were from, just to set the scene of whose feedback this is?
Yep, so we've got 235 people who have responded, which I think is fantastic. That's double what it was in 2019. I won't take that to mean necessarily that the Megagame community has doubled in size. But we've also got stats on whereabouts the people are from, unless, of course, they prefer not to say. But this means that we know for a fact that 122 people have answered from the UK. One person who I'm sure probably wanted this to happen has said that they're from Aardvark. So I have mentioned them. They can be very happy about it. But generally, people have answered whereabouts they're from. And an interesting thing, which will be as a consideration for the survey next year, which I know we'll talk a bit later about anyway, is that we'll have to try and tidy up definitions there, because some people have got ethnicity and nationality mixed in, which I understand can be close as an ideal for some people. But yeah, we do have a lot of data about where people are from, which is why 4 separate regions have been singled out because they had the most people answer, which are the UK, the US, Australia, and Sweden.
And I feel like for some people, Australia might be the strange hanger on there, but for me, I was surprised, being quite ignorant of the scene, that Sweden was in that top 4. But clearly, there's a very big Megagame community there compared to some other little pockets across Europe.
Oh, Gothenburg and East Sweden and Malmo, they're all going to be very disappointed in you. Please don't hurt me if I've missed out a group. But yeah, no, they've been going for quite a while. And there's some fantastic stuff coming out of Sweden along the lines of Event Horizon, which is obviously legally distinct from any film that might have the same name. Well, even if some of the themes might happen to be very similar. And an upcoming mega game called Dino Island, which is nothing like any parks of any dinosaur periods that you may have observed. But they've got some really cool stuff, and they've got some really enthusiastic people. So yeah, Sweden leading the charge in terms of the rest of Europe really at the moment.
Excellent. Well, we might run through, I think we'll go through the global stats first and then maybe zero in on Australia. There's a huge amount of data here, so I think we'll have to see how we go in terms of we won't be able to read out everyone's comments that have been added to the survey or things like that. So I think we'll rely on you to guide us through. But maybe we should start with kind of the first question you've asked here, which is how many mega games have you ever been involved in as a player or control facilitator? Basically, how many mega gamers are answering the survey versus experienced mega gamers. And I think the biggest section here is about 43% of people have attended 1 to 4 mega games, 19% at 5 to 10, and then 11% at 11 to 15, and then a whole bunch of percentages at more or less than that.
Rob, was that surprising to you, and how do that ratio kind of stack up to the earlier survey that you've run?
So it's interesting because being involved in mega games means that you can definitely end up in a little bit of a bubble, or it's a bit like Venn diagrams. You can overlap with each other in some areas. So if you're in a group in a specific area, then you might know more people in that group. But if you've been around for a while, then you'll know other mega gamers who've been around also for a while, even if they're further away, because you'll probably have met up at games. So you end up getting a little bit of a picture, but obviously not a full and well-informed idea of what exactly is going on. So looking at this, I was, I shouldn't have been, but I suppose I was a little bit surprised by the number of respondents who'd had a very small number of games. Or I say very small. But yeah, one to 4 games. And I love the fact that there are so many people who have been to that many games who feel like, yes, I bloody love these. I'm going to fill in a survey. That's great. And that was my main takeaway there. Well, I'm also very impressed by the one person who has done more than 150 mega games.
Wow. And we should also say there's 2% of people who have done 0 mega games. So that's even more impressive that they have never been to the mega game, but they're really excited about them eventually getting to one.
Yeah.
They are very enthusiastic, and that was also lovely to see because there are some people who are out there. They've seen these things. They're talking about it with people. They're actively trying to recruit people to go to games. They might be trying to set one up themselves at a university or a local community center or something. And I don't know if it. Well, I mean, this is something that people can argue about. But can you be a mega gamer without having been to a mega game? I can think of at least one case where I'd argue yes, but that's for another podcast. But
We'll have
yeah,
that
no,
debate on another day.
Ooh, Megagame Definers Part 2.
yeah. Oh no, I've done it already. We're not even like 5 minutes in. Bugger.
Yeah, my thought would be that this survey would probably be biased towards, most people who are going to fill this out are probably on the more experienced end. So my thought would be that the mega game community might skew even more towards people who have played a more smaller number of mega games than the survey suggests, just as my kind of gut feeling.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, having a look at the past data, we had what is it? It's like the numbers don't quite match up because I was very clever and sensible like that. So instead of 1 to 4, it's measured in terms of 1 as a separate category, and then 2 to 5, and you're looking at sort of nearly 40. What is it? Yeah, 49 people who have been to that lowest category. Whereas with this, you're looking at 101. So we're double that already, and that means that a much larger percentage of the previous survey, because it had a small number of people who responded, are early career mega gamers. Can we say that? Are we going to start coining acronyms now?
Well, it's interesting. The career breadth and length varies geographically because in Australia the 11 to 15 would probably be the highest category that we've got, and it's only number 3 on this on this list you've got. So we can't career shame anyone just yet, but later in the podcast, I assure you, we'll get to it, Rob.
Everyone had to start somewhere, and I'm just jealous of the fact that there's people who are starting bright-eyed and hopeful about the future of mega games. Who are they going? This is amazing. Whereas I'm not jaded and cynical now, but it's a little bit like when you're young and Christmas is this big, wonderful thing, and then you get older and it's like, yeah, it's still fun. There's still things I like. I definitely still love mega gaming. Otherwise, I wouldn't be running a group and doing mega games all over, or doing this, which eats up a certain amount of time. But you do lose the magic a little bit. So all of you people at 1 to 4, I am jealous of you. You've got some great stuff.
No, we all are. And that actually came through a lot in the comments at the end of this survey where people got to leave their general thoughts. There were a lot of people calling out that they really enjoyed having new teammates and new players and getting to see them witness that moment of their first mega game, which is something, once you've played your first, you can't go and relive that again. But I will also just call out, speaking to Chris from Very Large Huge Games late last year about Aftermath, I was reminded about the scale differences when, before recording that episode, it was morning on his side of the pond, and he was saying that he needed to duck off after the recording to go to a mega game to help run it, but he didn't really remember which one it was.
Yeah, there we go.
And so that just made me, it put a lot of things in perspective for me.
So if mega games are Christmas in Australia, in UK it's just like Christmas every day. You're like, oh well.
Oh well, there's a song about that, I think, and we do wish it could be Christmas every day, but at the same time, once you have lots of games, then you become spoilt for choice. But again, that's another podcast.
Yeah.
Right. So tying into that question, the second one is how many times you've played Watch the Skies, and I was very interested that a lot of people have not played it who responded to this survey. It's 40% have played it, and then 40% have played it once or twice. and then 13% at 3 to 5 times, 6% 6 to 10 times, and 1% at 11 or more, which is a lot of times to play Watch the Skies. But it seems like, a substantial amount of people haven't played that kind of foundational mega game. Was that surprising to you, Rob?
I'm thinking about it exactly the other way around. 60% of all mega gamers who've responded have played Watch the Skies. That's the way I'm thinking about it, which I think is astounding, because I'm not sure there's any other game, apart from possibly Den of Wolves, that people will have played to the same degree. And I think having a unified experience like that can be useful, because it means that we're all talking the same design language, gameplay language. Equally, I've heard people talking about it, how they've said that someone more experienced who's been playing mega games since the 80s or 90s said that they thought that perhaps a lot of games that came after Watch the Skies were Watch the Skies clones with different themes slapped on top, which I think is unfair. But I could see where they were coming from, because once someone's played a game, they think that's how all the games go until they start to branch out a bit. But I think the fact that 60% of people have played Watch the Skies in this survey is it's a big number, and I'm surprised by how many people have, as opposed to how many people haven't. Because in the past few years, I think the number of Watch the Skies, depending where you are, has gone down a bit. But
That
Watch
would be
the
my
Skies, Watch the Skies sort of walked so that lots of other mega games could run. And that's not to say that other mega games
Absolutely.
haven't happened before, because yes, they have been happening all over the place, in all sorts of themes and settings. But it's Watch the Skies which was the breakthrough game. And thank you very much. Shut up and sit down for signal boosting.
Yeah. I was surprised by this answer, and I think it's just because nearly everyone that we speak to on this podcast, which arguably is a small little bubble, like you were referring to before, Rob, nearly all of them start with Watch the Skies, and they start with those videos. I suppose the community didn't have control over what game those guys just rocked up to. Like it just happened organically, and that's the way it spread. But in my mind, it's the ultimate sort of beginner's mega game, for better or worse or neutral or whatever it is. And I was surprised that internationally it was only 40% who said that they hadn't played it. Sorry. I think it's probably a good thing that there's so many mega gamers out there who haven't played it, because I'm definitely guilty in my very early days of slapping themes on top of the Watch the Skies model, and it's arguably either way you could argue that it's not the ultimate model for a mega game, or it is.
But
Either way,
if it
there's
works, go
yeah,
for it.
of course.
If there's something there and it's an easier job, because putting together a mega game takes hundreds of hours.
Yeah.
So if there's something which has already taken 50 hours out, 100 hours out, because a lot of the work's done, I'm not going to criticize anybody for putting that together. And it's a familiar format to a lot of people. But yeah, sorry, you were gonna ask if I had stats on something specific.
I was interested if you've got, I believe in the document we're looking at, it only has the global stats for this one. Do you have the info on how that breaks down by location? Are there people, are people in Australia more likely to have played Watch the Skies, or?
So I don't have that in the document, because there are some numbers I didn't specifically go into with the 4 regions, as I didn't think that would be as interesting for some of them.
Fair enough.
And also stuff like just the sheer number of games people had been to. Some locations are going to have much fewer. I do have that data, but yeah, that's not one that it might come out later. It might come out with the main article on Megagame Assembly, but I don't have that immediately to hand.
No, that makes sense. Awesome. The next one is about how many mega games people usually attend in a year. I think this one is pretty interesting. So first is how many mega games people would like to attend each year, And the
Yeah.
majority of people, 47% here, said 3 to 4 mega games. The next biggest is 1 to 2 mega games at 22%. But generally, it seems like around that 3 to 4 mark is what people would prefer. In terms of how many mega games people actually did attend last year during 2023, the big majority there, 64%, only attended 1 to 2 games. So, yeah, it seems like most people are really keen to play more mega games than they get a chance to at this stage.
Yeah, so looking at the raw numbers, just over 50 people responded that their ideal mega games would be 1 to 2, and then everyone else is much higher. But in terms of that, 3 times as many people who said they'd like to go to 1 or 2 went to 1 or 2, and those are people who would much rather have gone to more, but for whatever reason couldn't make it. And I do think that's interesting because early on in Mega Games, there was a prolonged conversation around how many mega games and what size population and how often you would need to sustain mega games running. And I think we're at a point where there is definitely demand. And again, whole other podcast. I think some of the issues around it are potentially sometimes in marketing and getting information out about an expectation setting. But yeah, there's clearly a lot of people who want to get out there and do mega games a lot more, but there's all sorts of reasons that they might not necessarily be able to.
And I thought Jack's observation was interesting on this, and I can see it applying heavily to Australian groups, because as we were
Definitely.
talking about before the podcast started, we're spread out here, and running games across different cities doesn't necessarily mean that everyone can access them. And I do get the feeling, while I'm no expert, maybe the American mega game scene is the same, as there's several groups that have propped up over the years, but they're all, as far as I know, geographically spread out and might not be sharing audiences all the time. So I'm wondering if that discrepancy is more of an international sort of condition of the time right now of what we're able to do in different areas versus the everyday norm in the UK scene, which seems to be the most constant and the most versatile as far as getting people, out of town coming to your game.
No, that's fair. I'm just hopping down to the UK data to have a quick look at that. And ideal mega games in a year in the UK is again 3 to 4 at 48%, and the 1 to 2 and the 5 to 6, which are globally around 20%. In the UK, again, it's around 20%. It's a little bit lower for 1 to 2. And then in terms of actual games attended, it's nearly 60% 1 to 2 in the UK.
Wow.
So people are still, like, nearly half want to go to 3 or 4, but we've got nearly 60% who are on 1 or 2. So
It,
that's
it looks like
something that,
it's even more that direction in the Australian data, because it's 71% have only been to 1 to 2, and 62% would prefer to go to 3 to 4, and then there's quite a few that would prefer to go to more than that.
yeah, if anything, that's a bigger case for the what was called the ticket survey, because I think information on frequency, distance travelled. We've got one fantastic player who comes over from Sweden for games in the UK, and he is an absolute stalwart for that. And we've also got a couple of Dutch players that do that. But yeah, just any information that I think we can then get in the next steps, which is moving into sort of more marketing and delivery, not to start sounding a bit corporate about it, because these are mega games and these are hobbies and they're fun. But that doesn't mean you can't do things properly just because it's a hobby and it's fun. But yeah, I think that's interesting, because then we're going to have all sorts of theories about why these things are happening like they are. So yeah, no.
In the freeform comments, it's a recurring theme as well about how games are marketed and advertised, and how they reach their audience. So I think you're definitely onto something there. I guess maybe contrasting to my first interpretation, maybe these figures are more looking at the resurgence of mega games post-COVID and the growing of the audience in general. There's people popping up out of all kinds of communities, finding mega games for the first time in 2023, and maybe only finding them on the back end and only getting to go to 1 or 2 games, which is probably quite a positive story, really.
Well, it seems like good news if you are running mega games or you want to run mega games. In general, it seems like people want to play more games than they are. So,
yeah, that's really good. And I think post-COVID, to go back to the slightly corporate-y speak, but there's a capability and stakeholder generation issue going on here. Is there's a lot of people and there's not enough stuff. But then I've also seen a few games which haven't filled. And that to me implies that there are things we could do to make it easier to get people along to these things. What they are, we can talk about till the cows come home. But yeah, that's something to have a think about. And this is just here to pose questions, to give people some stuff to chew over. We don't have the answers, not quite yet. Give us a few years when we've got loads of data.
If we are known for one thing on this podcast, Rob, it is not actually having any answers.
Oh, brilliant! That's what we like to
what
hear.
about when we conclusively solved mega games, Pat? We did that just the other
that's
day.
right.
We just didn't release
solve
that secret podcast.
I'm sorry, what?
We solved that, and then we also solved death in mega games about whether or not it's good or bad. So, okay, I take it back. We've solved a few things, but I do appreciate, Rob, you're setting us up for a good dozen or so other episodes on this data. So I appreciate that. Looking further on, the next few questions then go into sort of what people's role is and how they engage with mega games. The first one being, do you usually run or control mega games? Did you want to speak to the results of this? Because I find them pretty interesting, but sort of pretty in line with my expectations here in Australia.
Yeah. So one of the things about this is that, again, people's answers, they're exactly what you're thinking, what you're doing. There's no shame in whether you have ever controlled or facilitated or not. Some people, it's not necessarily in their wheelhouse. They might not feel so confident about it. And that's totally okay, because this is something that's also come up before in the UK, when occasionally we'll have games which don't have a full complement of control. And sometimes that can create bad feels, and it can make people a little bit more stressed. But that's not so much an issue now, but there did used to be a bit of an issue around trying to get people in. And if you don't want to do that, that's cool. However, it is also a lot of fun. As a control freak who runs a group, obviously I like doing control and facilitation stuff. But looking at the numbers here, from the never controlled, which is about a third of people, I don't know if that's due to the fact that they haven't been encouraged, they've not realized how to. Sometimes mega games can be quite cliquey, and we do not always signpost in the easiest ways how to get involved. We'll say to people, it's a community and we're all here to help each other. And someone might say, that sounds lovely, but how do I actually do the helping bit, apart from going to talk to people who I've only just met, who all seem to know each other and are all very knowledgeable about this topic? That's one possible reason that some people might not have controlled. Other reason is, they're not so keen. Equally, you've got some people who control quite a lot. And in fact, 5%, which I find really interesting, don't play games. And I'm in the usually control box, but 12 people out of the 235, they are just controls, really. And I hope they have a lovely time with it. But that's also interesting to see that there are people who are your forever games masters when it comes to RPGs, or they're always crewing LARPs. Some people like that role. I can see myself moving more towards that because I've got a big spreadsheet of all the games I've ever been to. And I can see gradually, more and more, I'm moving into not playing roles and just controlling. So in the next few years, I might be one of those not playing. But yeah, it's good to see that there's also a chunk of people who are balanced. So we've got 1 in 5 people who are doing a bit of control and a bit of playing. And I think that's a nice, healthy number, because depending what your game is, like Den of Wolves, you might need 2 to 4 control. And then there's some other games, especially big operational sort of Second World War or Napoleonic games. They can have 1 control per 4 players. Sometimes, sometimes the ratio, especially for a blind map game where neither side gets to see the map and controller doing everything, that number can sometimes possibly even squeak a bit higher. So I think 1 in 5 doing a bit of both is good. And then usually control is also 1 in 5. If we could have a ratio of 1 control or facilitator per 5 people, or to 5 players, I think that would be perfect. It's just how to encourage them to support them and make sure that they can get to games and get recognized. Because another thing can be sometimes people will control a lot and they won't necessarily feel as though they're getting recognition for that, because they are helping out. And that's where you just, if you're playing the game of Dungeons and Dragons or Call of Cthulhu, you bring the crisps and the drinks, like that sort of thing. I'm not saying everyone has to come and bring stuff to appease the facilitation team for Megagames, but offer them a Jaffa cake if they walk past your table.
I would say I was actually quite impressed how many people have controlled. Honestly, I think 70%, around 70%. So only 33% who've never controlled. So around 70% who have controlled at some stage. I don't know. It does strike me as quite a lot, considering that inherently there's always going to be more players than control members, right? I don't know. To me, that seems like quite good as an amount. I don't know. Just as maybe my bias is there.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I think it's very heartening. It's just thinking about those numbers compared to games I've seen where sometimes there's not always. Well, I guess for that, it's also a case of we need 6 control for this game. 6 people will volunteer, and then 1 person will be ill on the day, or their car will have a flat battery. You're down to 5 control, and then it becomes a bit more difficult. That, again,
Right.
whole other podcast on how do you work out how to have the right number of control. But yeah, no, I think overall positive.
Yeah, I was just going to move us. My last comment on that, I think, is probably, I think those numbers probably skew a little bit here in Sydney, or at least Australia, perhaps Australia broadly, where there's probably a smaller group. There's probably a larger number who have never controlled. Slightly larger. We definitely in Sydney see the sort of regular crowd who really want to be the ones helping run things. And most games, they will show up and be the ones helping facilitate. But in this last year of restarting sort of mega games here, we've definitely seen a lot of new faces as well. So I think it's trending in a good direction. But I guess, like you've been saying, Rob, I suppose everyone has their own preference, and some people it's just not for some people, and likewise some would really much prefer it to play. Which I personally think I'm steering towards in my future as well. The next question, perhaps a good segue to that. The next question you asked was about designing mega games. How many have you designed that have been run? This is an interesting question, considering the stats that we've just gone over, the number of people how often they play, and what role they have in those games that run. And now we're looking at how many of them are actually doing the design work. And I'm not particularly surprised at these numbers either. But did you want to run us through it?
Yeah, so I specifically asked how many mega games have you designed and have been run, because I'm aware there's quite a few people who have just designed games. So there is a designed but not run option in there. And that specific question about how many of you designed but not had, how many of you have designed games but your games haven't been run, is 14%. which equates to about let's see, where is it? That's just over 30 people. And just having an extra 30 plus designers would be an amazing result if we can plug in and help you in any way. Designers, if any of you listen, get in touch with anyone in a group who runs a group, and they will help you. Or at least they will try to help you, or they will signpost you to someone who can. But otherwise, yeah, I'm not surprised. Over 60% of people haven't designed a game. That's, yeah, a lot of people want to just turn up, they want to play a game. That's cool. It's when you have your, well, there's the result of, there's someone who replied who's done 10 plus designs that have been run. We have a nice chunky group of nearly 40 people in the 1 to 2 category. We've got nearly 20 people in the 3 to 5 category, and we've got a handful in the 6 to 9 category. And I think that's a healthy place to be again. You've got some keen beans who are putting games out there, and the more they do, the more they learn. It's an iterative process. You sort of pick things up, you develop, you make it better than before, you try out new things. And if anything, I'm happy that nearly, 40% of all responders have designed a game, even if they haven't all run games. So yeah, I think that's a good place to be again.
Absolutely. Awesome. The next part you've got here is about what settings and genres and themes people enjoy most in their games. And I was kind of surprised by this, but it seems like the dominant force here is sci-fi winning the biggest percentages. So we've got at the top of the chart, we've got 68% sci-fi involving struggles of humanity, like The Expanse, Firefly, Den of Wolves, Crisis in Elysium, that kind of thing. And then second is sci-fi with big space conflict and diplomacy themes like Star Wars, Twilight Imperium, Warhammer. And then third is sci-fi set on Earth with X-Files, Thunderbirds, Watch the Skies, that side of things. Did you have any thoughts on this one, Rob? Does this line up with your experiences that people are keen on that style of theme over others?
Yeah, I mean, I think from the previous Megagame survey, sci-fi won out. I don't think there was any question about that. Like, fantasy, I think, came second, but yeah, otherwise, people really want to get in their spaceships, play with lasers, and basically just, yeah, make sure that they can do all sorts of things in a near future setting, far future setting, play with some aliens. And I'm not an anthropologist, I'm not a cultural critic. I don't know why that might be. Looking at wider cultural issues, you can start to, again, jump into a whole new podcast about settings and genres and why what is popular or not. I think part of this might be due to some of the terminology, because when you look at mega games, there are some specific genres which are quite popular. So there was a period where there were multiple sci-fi games set on Mars, for example, and various games which have a dystopian element, and you've got those, and then you've also got your big sort of Galactic Dawn style, or by other means, sort of big space conquest, get in your spaceship and go and laser people. So I think the sci-fi categories there might need a bit of tweaking for next time. If anything, I'm surprised that fantasy wasn't slightly higher, but it's only just behind the third sci-fi option. And if anything, there's a lot of overlap between the top two sci-fi options of big space conflict and struggles of humanity. But then the historical, with ancient to medieval coming in fifth, I think is also partially tied in to the fact that high fantasy, Tolkien, Dungeons and Dragons, The Witcher, Everybody Dies, Aliens Conquest, those sorts of bits of games and media. The ancient medieval can sometimes feel a bit like fantasy, which I think is interesting, and that's something that this is purely anecdotal because it's one gaming group and it's EMM, but we in East Midlands Megagames did a game called Last People on Earth about Celtic Britain, and something that people were really keen on was that it's just before the Romans turn up, and there is a quasi-mystical feel to it, because go back far enough and it's lots of people running around with swords and shields and doing heroic things, which obviously the further down you go in history, the more you do that, someone's going to come along and say, well, you're not the king, stop doing that, or you can't do that, we've got all these laws and we have these different treaties with people, or they just shoot you. So yeah, I think it's interesting to see that you've got definitely a fantasy sort of fantasy earlier history overlap, and then there's also the two sci-fi topics at the top with a bit of an overlap, and then as you go down, I think it's interesting to look at some of the subjects which are more popular, and there's definitely a bit of diversity between some of the regions when it comes to this, but it's never huge. It's not like one place really likes World War One to World War Two above everything else. Normally it's just switching 2 or 3 places. But cyberpunk is much lower than I thought it would be. The Cold War,
49%.
Yep. And the Cold War is a little bit higher than I thought it would be because it's Cold War 2030, so it's sort of now-ish.
Right.
But I would have thought that would have been a little bit lower, but I also happen to know a lot of war studies, political nerds. I'm a political nerd. Lots of people who are interested in that, and I thought it was a bit more niche. But I'm sorry to see superheroes all the way down there with just under a quarter.
Superheroes is the least popular at the bottom of the chart at 24%.
Really like Jonathan Pickles in the UK has done a game called The Real Heroes, and it's about superheroes, and I've facilitated for it, and it was fun. It's sort of like The Boys meets the Marvel Universe, and people are heroes, and they run around doing all sorts of crazy things. It was a good time, but obviously we have some hard stats in front of us. However, if things cater to people, and people turn up to it, then it's still a success. It just shows you what kind of games people might be interested in. And I think Den of Wolves is going to be responsible for 68% at the top there as well.
That makes sense. My guess would be that people might be suffering a bit of superhero fatigue from how popular and dominant they are in movies and pop culture right now.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably pretty true. The Marvel effect, as various blogs and podcasts and think pieces have been telling me, has been on the decline. But I've also not been keeping up with the films, so I guess, yep, that's me just showcasing exactly what they're talking about. Then all the other stats there, I'm not quite like it's as low as it is. Sorry, go on.
No, sorry. I was just going to say I do quite like your explanation for why ancient and medieval historical is quite high. Originally, I was surprised to see the 2 major or the 3 historical genres sort of quite far down. But nonetheless, especially when considering a question a little bit further along where we ask about Megagame adjacent hobbies, spoilers, war games were still quite high up that list. And I was a little bit surprised to see the historical categories like the Renaissance and the World Wars down so low on this list when the DNA of Megagames arguably is very embedded in the wargaming world. I guess my major sort of overarching thought about this is these genres are probably very heavily influenced by what has been run in these places where people have filled out the survey, and some areas may not have had a full, breadth of diversity of games, so they can only speculate about whether or not a World War II megagame would be actually good,
Yeah,
true.
That's very fair. Thinking about it two of my all-time favorite games happen to fall into the historical World War I to World War II period. There was a Russian Civil War game that was amazing, and then another one falls into the sort of Renaissance to 19th century one, which was about the Elizabethan period, so Spanish Armada, Ottomans at the doors of Europe, French Wars of Religion. That was also an amazing game. Both of them were fantastic, and I don't know if it's because there's some demographic. Some of this goes into demographic stuff, but some of the people playing Mega Games now just aren't as interested in the historical stuff because they want to do the sci-fi and they want to do the fantasy and they want to do the big sort of fictitious adventure because that's what's cool and interesting at the moment.
Yeah, and I think my last comment would be, although you can definitely apply this to fantasy, high fantasy or urban fantasy, but I do feel the current sort of zeitgeist in fiction is that sci-fi is the tool for telling modern stories without committing to reality. For example, Watch the Skies. It is a modern story, depending on what version you play, but it's set in a fictional version of the real world because sometimes playing something out in the real world is a bit prickly and a bit uncomfortable and depressing. So I feel like sci-fi is the closest analog to let you do those things without getting too too depressed about it all.
No, that's very true, and I think there's a strong and proud tradition of disguising scenarios whereby you take something that has happened in history and you slap some spaceships and lasers over the top of it. So, yeah, I already mentioned By Other Means, which is actually about the 30 Years War. Spoilers, in case anyone didn't know that. And if you want to look into German civil wars and Swedes turning up and all sorts of religious sectarian violence, you can Google that and you can get depressed about it, or you can stick it in space and people won't always necessarily realize. So yeah, that there is a strong tradition for that.
American Civil War, I find, is nearly always set in space these days, often on Mars. Very funny how that happened.
Well, going back to the fact that there was a period when there were loads of Martian games, and yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there's going to be more in our future. Because actually, ones like Crisis in Elysium by Alex Beck, again, absolutely fantastic, really solid concept, fantastic, easy to grasp factions, very atmospheric, and I think games like that are also another reason that sci-fi is so big because sometimes if you build it, they will come. People have built lots of sci-fi games. People have played lots of sci-fi games. If we had suddenly loads of people doing games on the Spanish Civil War or excuse me, or the Wars of the Roses, those numbers might get bumped up because people have played them and they go, actually, no, you know what? This is fun. Maybe that Richard III guy was a villain and he really did have a go at his nephews. But that aside, yeah, you could talk for a long time on the setting and genre preferences, but I think I've given a quick overview. And what's there? Oh, and I should also mention that there was the other category. We did have a few people suggest certain other things. So the most popular of the other things was, I think, animals. So Watership Down, Animals of Farthing Wood, anything where you're a load of animals, sort of. Yeah. And then there were a couple of other things, like someone suggested sort of where you're all parasites inside a person trying to do whatever you're supposed to do as a parasite or as a bit of an organ or a blood cell or something. And then sport games. And I know for a fact that sport games have been run, so I'm a little bit surprised more people didn't put them in the other category. And they might get their own category in future, because I know that at least True North here are doing a wrestling management game. So they might not be massive, but they're definitely, well, they have a presence. They're there.
But moving on from themes, let's talk about the type of gameplay or mechanics or that side of things that people most enjoyed for question 8. I think so. The highest response here is 80 for teamwork, which makes sense. I think that is a pretty key element of mega games, working together with the rest of your crew. I think the spiciest thing, though, that I found here personally is that the second highest response is role playing or game immersion at 76. And the more mechanical side of mega games, more mechanical elements, is the last, the lowest response at only 23. So it definitely seems like at least the survey respondents have much more enjoy the role playing elements over the more board gamey or mechanical elements.
Yeah, I think that's very valid. Like there's definitely, it looks like there's 3 main tiers here. So you've got your teamwork at the top, followed by your role playing, followed by negotiation and diplomacy, strategy, personal goals and objectives. So that's lots of stuff people can get their teeth into and talk to other people and get your tensions and build your stories, which is then followed by conspiracy and treachery, which I won't necessarily say that coup and werewolf are some of my favorite games, but I'm happy that was 55%. Along with your investigation and then resource management and building. So that's the next level. And then at last, costuming, dressing up, conflict, more freeform play, which I'm surprised by because I love Wii's freeform play, creative play, research and technology trees. I know some people who absolutely hate that as mechanics. Your world conquest is down there under 30%. So empire building and world conquest, often something that's seen as being, here's a mega game, there's going to be some fighting, you're on teams, go and beat each other up. And then mechanical at the bottom. And I don't know if it's one of the key caveats of this is that you can only look at the data that people have sent you. I know people who quite like tinkering with some of the mechanical elements, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily anyone's favorite bit of a mega game because we have board games for that. And as we'll come to later on, it turns out a ridiculous number of us are board gamers. So if you want mechanical bits, then often you're going to be doing that with your Root or your Twilight Imperium or your Settlers of Catan, and you want to go to a mega game because you want to promise someone that you're going to pay them 10 gold next turn, and then whilst they're not looking, kidnap their princess.
Very true. And yeah, it seems like in Australia it's even more that way inclined because role playing game immersion came first with 86, and yeah, more mechanical elements right down there at the bottom with only 19. So yeah, it definitely seems like that's the way the wind's blowing.
Yeah, I think the way that these sort of stack up, to me, it really does help answer that question that everyone wants to argue about all the time about what a mega game is, which does come up quite a bit in this feedback, the feedback attached to this survey, where people have pointed out that the inability for some communities to define what mega games are is actually a little bit it can turn people off sometimes. But I feel like this little snapshot here, talking about being strategic, doing some strategic thinking, negotiating, doing the politics, doing the role playing and immersing yourself, and then teamwork. I think that really summarizes a lot of it for me, and I'm not too surprised that those are the top hits.
Yeah, no, it's something that, like, with a lot of bits of this survey, stuff that you could sort of guess, but it was gut feeling. You didn't have anything to go on really. And when you get into the regions, there is a little bit of difference. So, for example, in the US, mechanical elements are a bit further up
That makes sense.
but it's still not dominant. So generally, unless you go to Sweden, in which case I think they're the only place that get up a full unanimous 100% on anything, which is everyone wants to do teamwork, which is lovely. Although that means that occasionally peace can break out too early when you've still got 3 hours of gameplay left. But yeah, no, this is a really interesting bit, and I don't know if this is of use to designers or groups in general, but it can just help nudge you in the direction of what might people like to do. And again, that's not saying you could still try things, so build it, and they will come probably. But also, if people like a specific set of gameplay elements, then there might not be any harm leaning into it occasionally.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I 100% agree. There's been a lot of conversation here in Sydney recently in the design community about, I guess in summary, kind of pulling back and reminding yourself what's the audience and why is your idea fun? And how are you making this game a fun thing for the players? I think this is a super helpful tool to remind yourself of that. As is the next question, which was about elements of games that could improve Megagame experiences. When I was going through these results, I was really looking forward to this one. Rob, did you want to run us through how the results laid out on this one and what you think you've learned from it?
Basically, game experience elements which are outside of just gameplay. So that's stuff along the lines of: do you provide refreshments? Is there ambient music? Do you provide rules in a video beforehand? And there's definitely 3 top winners here. In first place being a game phase or timer projected onto a big screen. People want to know what turn or phase it is, and this is something that happens in lots of games already, which I think is fantastic, because there are some easy wins here, or to go back to slightly corporate speak, low-hanging fruit. Please excuse me.
You didn't.
And then followed by the next most popular thing, which is a post-game social and an opportunity to talk to other players. It's a fantastic place to make friends, to talk about why you sent your fleet to help someone else and not me, to find out what exactly was going on and who had the gem of Karumba at the end of the game. And it's just fun. It's nice. You've played a game, and then you are having a debrief and a bit of an unwind after what can sometimes be quite a high pressure and stressful but enjoyable experience. You want to have a sit down and have a drink of your preferred choice. And then the third thing of the top elements is gameplay or rules videos provided before the game, which is not something many people do, but it's clearly something that people want. So there's 3 things there that groups or designers can immediately look at and go, how achievable are these things? Are we going to be able to do these? Which is immediately, well, not quite immediately, there's a little bit of a gap, then followed by just a steady decline, going with a lunch break at 48%, which is something that has been, it was a little bit controversial in the UK when that was suggested. East Midlands Games now has a lunch break for all games. Some people like it, some people don't. There might possibly be some accessibility stuff around it. But again, that could definitely have a whole podcast around it based on some of the opinions. And then you get through things like thematic venue, that would be lovely. Premium game content, sort of nice components, stuff that looks nice. And you work your way down, all the way down to the bottom. And there's 2 things which in fact come after other, because people have always got ideas and thoughts about these things. And at the very bottom, under 10%, you've got more expensive tickets which provide merchandise, such as a mug, sticker, tote bag, or more expensive tickets which allow you to choose your specific game role. So both of those aren't super popular, even though I kind of liked the idea of more expensive tickets. If someone wants to pay an extra £5 or an extra or $5 or $10, so they get a tote bag or a poster or a pin badge or something. It's extra money which can go to the group to go on venue cost and new components for next time. Obviously, if not everyone wants to do it, that's fine. But I like the idea that you could stick that in as an extra option for the 2 or 3 people that might be interested.
Hmm. I'm interested in your perspective on this, Rob, from the UK scene. We've got a little bit of merch floating around here with Melbourne Megagames, and it's actually something I'm not a merchandise person at all, so I've been resistant to this. But in Sydney, in the new year, this year, we're actually trialing this where people can pick up extra bits of merch. They can add something on top of their ticket to get bit of like a memento or that kind of thing. I am wondering if with this survey, the way the questions were pitched, whether or not people interpreted this as saying the tickets would always be more expensive because these things are attached, or if they were looking at it from a perspective of being able to upgrade their tickets to get those extra things.
That's very fair, and that's definitely something which can be amended or cleared up in a future survey, because I was surprised how low it was based on the fact that I know very large, huge games have bought a mug press, and they make mugs, and people buy the mugs, and they buy the posters from games in the UK, and there's enough of them that they want to do this. So I think that could be a problem with the way the question was phrased, as opposed to the concept itself.
Yeah, I think so, because I'm, like I say, not a merch guy, but I have been swung around by the group here, helping run things in Sydney. In that, people want this stuff and they're interested in it, and it's a good way to support the group that's running all this stuff. So we're expecting to be relatively successful with it, but I suppose time will tell.
No, I think that's reasonable. But yeah, with the other stuff, I think a lot of it is there are elements that you could have guessed a lot of the time, and there's a bit of preference between the groups. I don't know if there's anything otherwise particularly shocking that either of you went, "Oh, that's surprising to me."
Mm-hmm.
No, not particularly, I think.
For me, I think if anything, I'm surprised that some of these things. I guess for me, I'm surprised that some games wouldn't have some of these things. For example, the game timer. But I suppose that's just the microcosm that we've developed here in Australia of how we do things. It's just the standard these days. But I can understand that different groups around the world do things differently. Likewise with the game components. There's certain ways of doing things and standards, that kind of thing here that we've gotten used to. But I understand it varies a lot from group to group and what's available to them and what skill sets they've got available as well. So I think it's all really useful food for thought.
Absolutely.
Yeah, food for thought that you will have at your lunch break, because people like it, and far be it from me to push my agenda on people. But I'm not
Well,
sure.
it's
I'm very
The,
pro lunch break. So.
yeah. This is the second time we've recorded an episode and lunch breaks have come up, and it is a hot issue.
Hot topic.
Maybe
Well,
an episode of itself.
The only thing I'll say on it is that as my day job, I do serious gaming for resilience government stuff, and I've done games before with security resiliency focuses, and serious people who do serious things for their day jobs have lunch breaks in their games.
That's right. Yep.
But
No,
yes,
I'll concede
Not
to that.
surprised.
yeah.
So the next set of questions are all about demographic information. Did you want to go through these, Rob, and kind of talk about what your conclusions might be or any takeaways from this?
Yeah. So first off, we've got the disability question, which is, do you have anything that might require accommodation in a mega game venue or environment? And I think this is important to ask because it might be stuff that people don't always realize because of hidden disabilities or the fact that some people aren't turning up to games, so you don't make accommodations for them. And I mean, I've spoken to some very experienced gamers, game designers, people who've been in like general geek and nerddom for many years, and they might be neurodiverse and occasionally require a timeout. And they've said that it used to be bad for some games because there'd be lots of noise, and now there's a bit more acceptance in some areas that, okay, if you need to take 5-10 minutes, you need to have a sit down, then we can make that available to you. And things like people in wheelchairs. Lots of games will often be quite tightly packed. It's about making sure that if we know that people are there who just require a little bit of extra help, we can do that. And it's everything from making sure that if someone's got IBS or something, that they're positioned close to a toilet. That's very sensible. Making sure that you've got places which are wheelchair accessible. That's very sensible. I understand it's not always possible with locations and budgets, but I do think this is something that we should always try to do. And yeah, basically the data says nearly 1 in 5 people have an accommodation for going to mega games. So mobility stuff, fatigue, sensory overload, color blindness, and yeah, I think that we could definitely put a little bit more thought into it, because we want to make sure that when someone comes along to a game, they don't feel crap because they thought, oh no, I couldn't do stuff because I was impeded due to a disability. You want them to go along to a game and think, yep, I'm gonna just focus on subverting the Archduke or building the best alliance. So yeah, big tent,
Yeah.
everybody included, and I don't think it would be too difficult to help with that in lots of cases.
I think a big one I took from
Absolutely.
that, particularly with some of the specific feedback which people gave about this, particularly sort of mobility and accessibility. I feel, like you say, there's a lot of things out of our control sometimes when we are preparing events. Sure, there's plenty that you can do in the design of mega games, but when you're dealing with venues and that kind of thing, sometimes certain things aren't in your control. I think it's really important to still take away that communicating this kind of stuff is important. So if you end up with a venue that is not accessible to a certain need, it's important to make sure that that's known so that people aren't surprised or upset or disadvantaged, that kind of thing. But by all means, it's all really important stuff to keep in mind when you're planning these big events.
Yeah, and some of that feedback's been really important and useful because East Midlands Megagames, we've got a little sort of internal constitution charter thing, and basically it says we want to make sure we only ever use accessible venues, so we only ever do use accessible venues, which is great, but then we've realised we don't always signpost that the venues are accessible, which means that even if we've got the disabled toilet, got a lift, and everything can be accessed, we haven't necessarily signposted it and put anything on the event on the event promo stuff, which is rookie mistake, but something that we can improve in future. So if you do these good things, make sure you mention it somewhere, because it will help people decide, yep, that's the thing I want to go to.
Definitely. Yeah, for us, first run of God Emperor, we released an accessibility breakdown doc before the event, just going through toilet information, food arrangements, parking and transport. And a lot of that information is also just really good information for anyone to know. So I think it's hugely useful as a thing to focus on.
Yeah, your pre-game brief, it's very useful. Ideal place for
Absolutely.
it.
Awesome. And then the next question is about gender identity.
So I don't think this one is going to be too surprising for people, although depending on your group, it might be surprising in quite how dominant men are in megagaming. As globally, we've got a stat of 77%, which some people might actually think is low. And other groups will go, wow, okay, that's not what we were expecting at all. Because we have slightly more diverse attendees, and again, you've got who you've got doing the games, whoever turns up. This isn't supposed to be shaming anyone for lack of representation. It's who comes to your games. So obviously, I think we would like to try to increase that as much as possible in terms of women, non-binary people. But for the time being, we've got a number which is basically just over 3/4 of everyone going to a game is going to be a guy. And thinking about it in those terms, and some of the games I've been to, I'd actually be quite happy if we'd had those kinds of ratios. But I suppose it might be that it depends on content, it depends on group, and there's more demographic stuff to think about and look at in terms of what appeals to who. Which again, great podcast or just general pub conversation. I don't know what your opinions are because I've got lots here, but I'm also aware that we've got other things to talk about.
Yeah, this podcast, this episode, extends beyond the 77% ratio. So we're not necessarily qualified, but I feel that I feel that making mega games as diversely accessible as possible is the sole goal, without sort of targeting a certain demographic. Making them as diverse as possible is probably the goal that everyone has or should have. What people are interested in and what it is that makes people tick and come to games, I think will always be quite a unique thing to pinpoint. As you see a bit later on, we're talking about hobbies that are adjacent to mega games. There's a wide array there, and there are a fair few in there. There are a fair few that I have in my head that weren't actually in that answer. So I think it's a very diverse area, and so it's hard to pinpoint the audience. But the other thing I'd say is, in making games diversely appealing and accessible, the second step is also getting the word out there. And I think from going through the results of this survey, that's something that the community as a whole isn't doing that well just right now. Advertising and marketing and shooting our message out into new areas. So I think that's probably the focus takeaway for me.
Definitely. I think increasing the accessibility and diversity of the community is something we need to do a lot better on, honestly, and it should be a huge focus, I feel like, especially coming out of this data.
I think this is one where before the stuff's released on Megagame Assembly, I'm tempted to see if I can get any stats on LARPing, tabletop role-playing, and wargaming, because I think it would be interesting to see a comparison there.
Yeah,
and
sure.
yeah, see what we can draw out of that data.
So moving on, I guess building on that diversity, on that question, the survey also asked about gender identity as assigned at birth and broke that down, and there's a similar trend there, I suppose. And then also, Rob, you've delved into sexual orientation as well.
Yeah.
I feel that this is a hard one to say. Hey, when you went to a mega game on the weekend, did you expect that the room would have this many people who identify in this certain way, or but nonetheless, did you find any surprises in these results?
So it looks like we've got. I mean, obviously, with all of these, there's an option of prefer not to say, because I think it's better to capture the majority of data people are willing to share and accept that they don't always feel comfortable sharing something, than just exclude people and say, you have to tell us everything. Because I saved that draconian personality for mega games. And the fact that 11% of people, or in this context, 25 people out of the 235 don't have the same gender identity that they were assigned at birth. And I am reasonably happy at the moment about those numbers, thinking about them overall in terms of general population, because it shows that mega games are a welcoming space that people are comfortable to come to. So yeah, for the gender identity one, great. And moving into the sexual orientation, yeah, it looks like there's a bunch of queer megagamers out there. So, as a bisexual guy myself, there's 1 in 5 megagamers identifying as bisexual or pansexual, which is a reasonably chunky number. We've got just over 60% heterosexual. We've got 4% homosexual. We have 10% preferring not to say, 3% asexual, and 1% who identify as something other than those listed. And I think numbers like this aren't necessarily there to try and. It all depends on how you want to talk about it, I guess. But it's basically to show, hey, everyone, look, we're a welcoming space, and there's going to be some more people like you if you want to come along to it. It's very rare, and I can't think of any active instances where beyond someone. No, I can't think of any instances immediately to mind where I've been playing a game and it's, oh, hey, do you have those 3 extra divisions to hold up the northern front? No, but I am bisexual. That doesn't normally come up.
Yes.
But otherwise, those 3 extra divisions could have walked so much faster because of all of the iced coffee they were drinking. But yeah, it's nice to see that there are groups happy to come along to the games and feel happy in those spaces.
Yeah,
that is wonderful.
I think I took the same general message from it as well. I think the cynic in me, in looking at these kind of stats for some other hobbies, I would expect them to be far different or far less colorful charts. But there are a lot of representations on these, and I think that itself says something about this hobby. Whether there's definitely improvement to make or direction to take, but there's a lot of representation there, which is good.
Yeah, I would love to see that comparison.
I was just going to say, looking at general population stats, I think it's very heartening to see the numbers we've got here as general stats on sexuality for a country's population are not normally as colourful as you mentioned as this. So yeah, sorry I interrupted. What were you going to say?
Oh no, I was just going to say I would love to see that comparison between this and the hobbies and see how it stacks up, because that'd be very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely love role playing, and probably I'm a role player before I'm even a mega gamer or a war gamer or anything else. I'm also a war gamer. I'm suspecting wargaming, the heterosexual element would be higher, but role playing, I'm wondering if that would be a bit more diverse still. And that's going on gut, going on anecdotal stuff, going on local friendly gaming stores. But yeah, I think it'd be interesting to see how other groups line up with this, because there's all sorts of comparative stuff you can do, but I haven't yet looked at any other hobbies and their demographic stuff. Like, I've been going to LARP groups for various things, and I don't know if they've got something like this, but it would be interesting to go and find out.
And the next question is about caring responsibilities for anyone else, like a child or an older family member. And the majority here seems to be no, with 73% who, either don't have children or don't have other caring responsibilities.
So this is something that I think someone actually suggested this question to me when I was asking a few people to have a look at the survey beforehand, to make sure that it made sense. And someone suggested, why don't you ask about caring responsibilities? And I think that was a really good idea, because as comes up in the general comments at the end, some people say that they can't make it away because they do have commitments like childcare and stuff. And I think that's something which should be a consideration, because not all mega gamers are going to be young, carefree, single or childless people who are sort of able to just go and do games at the drop of a hat, or people who don't have other caring responsibilities. Like, older relatives or siblings who need care and assistance. So the fact that we know nearly a quarter of people have some kind of caring responsibilities, I think, is relevant because it also ties into the fact that people can't always make it to games. What you do about that is a whole other question, which is bigger than Megagames. But I don't know if there is any kind of support or anything that we could do to help people who've got caring responsibilities. I know that having seen it before, I've been to a couple of games where carers for players have been present. Beyond that, and that's slightly different. But beyond that, this is one that I'm glad we're asking because I think it's useful and reflects the fact that people do have other commitments outside gaming, but I'm not sure what we can do about it quite yet.
It's definitely a good thing to sort of keep in mind, I suppose, as designers and facilitators. But connecting it to some of the feedback that comes at the end of this survey, there were a lot of comments that I saw which were about when games are, how much notice there is given when they're coming up, particularly those on weekends. So I think someone left a comment about them working most weekends, so that they need a lot of notice to be able to get that time off. Likewise, smaller games that are not necessarily associated with cons or anything like that, but they are still shorter engagements where people can go without having to commit an entire day. And I think that those kind of overlap maybe with some of these responsibilities that people might have. So it's worth keeping in mind when we're offering a range of different kinds of games.
Yeah, no, I think that's very fair. Like there's a few. Some people have called them kilo games. I know some people don't like that title, but basically shorter mega games. That's definitely a thing that some people have been trying out. Shorter and smaller, so things which are like up to 20 players that you can play in 2 or 3 hours, that kind of thing. I've seen a few of those being developed. In fact, we're helping playtest John Keyworth with a cut down version of Den of Wolves at the end of January. So there's definitely an appetite for those things. People want to do them, and yeah, they are definitely a direction to go in. They won't replace full-size mega games in my heart, but I also think that they are delightful and fun, and I play them when I see them. So yeah.
It's definitely something that we're looking at in Sydney here. I'm not sure if we're going to get away with it this year, but we are looking at splicing up our calendar of games and inserting a few smaller ones where we can maybe run the same game twice in one day, that kind of thing. It's an experimental space for us. I don't think we've explored it in Australia just yet, as mega games anyway. But I think there's plenty of scope there, and it's not just for people who maybe have other responsibilities who can't commit, but I think it could be an interesting way to get new people involved who just want to taste test this extreme full day event.
That is the exact
Definitely.
same conversation that we've had around UK Games Expo. And I am of the opinion that we should have some big full mega games available to people, but I do also like the shorter games. See if they get people in. Please, by all means, try some experiments, try new things, and share with everyone else how it went. Because if it turns out the best way to get people in is these shorter games, I am big enough of a man, even if I'm not that tall a man, to be able to say, "Yep, I was wrong. Short games, they're the way forward."
I think it's a bold but fair stance to say that they'll never replace mega games in your heart, though. I can agree with that.
It's reasonable.
The next couple of questions, Rob, are about ethnicity and nationality. Did you want to walk us through what you've learned from those two?
Okay, so on ethnicity and nationality, I think something to take away is that the questions themselves need to be better phrased because some people may have confused the two in some places. And also something that has been a thought is that regardless of ethnicity and nationality, it still doesn't indicate your current location.
Mm.
Right.
And I can think of multiple instances of people who, well, especially for when it comes to nationality, they might be of one nationality, but they are living somewhere else and attending games in somewhere else. So yeah, that's something to think about for future. But in terms of ethnicity, I don't think anyone is going to be surprised by quite how white mega games
Mm.
are. There are small, and we are talking small numbers of people who aren't white. We've also got 13% of people preferring not to say, which I think is one of the highest numbers of people not wanting to answer.
Mm.
And yeah, thinking about that, it's reflected in all the photos we have. It's something which comes up in conversation, and I think there is a little bit of a stereotype of mega games as being often white, middle class, primarily men, and some of this data doesn't exactly dispute that. Although obviously the class bit is a question we don't have in there, and we might think about that for future stuff. But just in general, I don't know what to say about it apart from it would be great if we could do better, and it's just thinking about how we can do better, because we want to share mega games with everyone and take over the world through mega games.
Yeah. I think it comes back to
Definitely.
the representation of gender and other identifying things in games. It's about getting everything diverse and accessible, and then out there to as many people as possible, which I think is a recurring thread throughout all of this. But
Yeah.
it's definitely not it's definitely not a one size fits all problem to solve. Definitely
Yeah.
some work to be done.
No, of course.
Absolutely.
So more than happy to try and get mega games out to as many people as possible, no matter whereabouts you are. So yeah, it's just thinking about how to do it and share the mega game love. And then of course we've got the nationality stuff, and that's just whoever answered. It's interesting. We've got a few things like we've got Argentinian, Canadian, Sri Lankan. So groups or people which aren't normally as present. I'm very happy that there is an Argentinian group. I would love to talk to them or help and support them in any way possible, because again, global domination through mega games. But it's just the fact that I don't really speak Spanish. So if anyone has any linguistic ability to be able to help with any of these other groups, then by all means come forward. It's also with this looking at some of the numbers and knowing how many groups are around, knowing how many people are around. I don't think there's a full representative sweep here. So the fact that there is an Argentinian group, and we had, I think, 4 Argentinians respond, 4 or 5, maybe a bit higher. But then also Mega Games, that there is a Dutch Mega Games group, and I don't think anyone from the Netherlands has responded. So, and also the Swedish group. So Sweden's gender stats, there are no women in Sweden, according to the people who responded. However, I know that's not true. So, some of this is just about, we've got these numbers now. Next year, let's see if we can bump them up a bit and get more of a clear picture. And that's something to think about between now and then. But I'm not surprised 50% of respondents were from the UK. There's loads of us. We've got lots of groups. We're quite active. Australia, I think you've got loads of king beans. Sweden's got several groups. US, yeah. It's just about trying to get in front of people, and then get them to respond. And if some of that means having to translate the survey and send it to people, then I guess I'm gonna be trying to find language speakers to help me with that.
I think as we've been going through this, I have been thinking about these numbers because you've got 200 and I think it was 260 plus respondents in total. But when you do map that against the number of mega games run last year and how many individual people probably came across to them, we're still looking at quite a small snippet. And so maybe 2024, there's other ways we can get this in front of more people, perhaps live running as the games actually happen, engaging with these audiences, because there's clearly a lot of people who have not had their say in this.
Yeah, no, very much so.
That's always the case with these kind of surveys, but yeah, it's worth considering. The next one, probably one of the last demographics, or there's a couple of interesting ones there. The age demographic. I was having a quick look at this earlier, and I have to say I wasn't awfully surprised at the responses here. I feel like the two majorities would probably be a little bit bigger in the Sydney group. But how did this match up to your experiences in the UK, Rob?
Well, it's interesting because in terms of global stats, I think the UK, or I would have thought that the UK had a slightly older skewing because Megagame Makers is the group is here, and that's a lot of people who've been megagaming since the 80s. Whereas there are newer groups like in Australia and in America, and I think that those do have slightly younger crowds. Not to say that people can't come along who are older who haven't megagamed before, because I've seen that happen. But obviously, if you've been doing it for a prolonged period, you stick with it. It's what you know. Yeah. I'm not surprised. Well, maybe I'm slightly surprised that no one 15 or under responded. I thought we might get one or two. Age of megagamers is another thing that comes up occasionally for groups, mostly around safeguarding and insurance. But yeah, I would have expected one or two, but no one from that bracket responded. Only a very small number were prepared not to say, which I'm quite happy about. But otherwise, yeah, it looks like the majority of megagamers are between 25 and 44, which I probably could have guessed that. I would have guessed. But yeah, otherwise it's a little bit different between regions. It's interesting to see. I think if I wanted to be super granular about it, I might be able to map certain game preferences, possibly to ages, see if anything comes out there. There is a general there's a general stereotype that older megagamers prefer historical games, which is true in wargaming as well. Actually, it's sort of you play Warhammer when you're young, and then you start playing Napoleonics as soon as you get past the age of 40. And I don't know how true that is necessarily, and I don't know if that's true necessarily when it comes to mega games. But if I have any time left over from anything else, I might give that a bit of a tinker. Otherwise, I don't think there's any big with the ages.
Couple more demographic questions. The last one that I'm really interested to dig into, but before that, extroverts and introverts and ambiverts. This was a little bit surprising to me, where almost it's a clear majority, but almost half of those who responded said that they were ambiverted. Rob, again, in the UK scene, does this sort of ring true to you?
Yeah, I think that's fairly reasonable. You get, well, as one of the people in the 17% of the extroverted bit, I'm fully aware and recognise that there are people who are louder, who are happier to talk in front of crowds, who are more likely to just get up in your face, ask questions, and sort of either be aggressively supportive or sort of trying to swindle you because they want the town that you're occupying at the moment in the game, or whatever. And I guess I have been doing all sorts of gaming for many years, and I am not surprised that there is a high number of introverts. I'm surprised that there aren't as many extroverts.
I am surprised that for Megagames specifically, that it is only 17% extroverts, considering how much socially activity the whole genre involves.
Yeah, I'm it's not something to be disappointed by because I'm not that
No.
invested in it. Although looking at it, it does remind me slightly of the Czechoslovak roundel as used in the Second World War on the Czech Air Force. But that aside,
Focus.
yeah, focus.
Let's go to the next one, which is big, which is how soon do you read the game materials?
This is fire.
I was surprised by this.
Specifically, I asked him the question, or I made it clear, please, this is anonymous, answer honestly. And I'd like to think this is honest.
I
at
believe
least
it.
appreciate the 2% of
Not
people
sure how
who
honest it-
don't read the game materials.
Yeah, so 42%, if I'm reading it correctly, please correct me, but it says 42% of people read the materials as soon as they get them. And then 37% at least a week beforehand, 14% the day before the game.
Both of those are rubbish, I think.
14% the day before the game, 5% en route to the game, and only 2% do not read the game materials. I find it quite hard to believe this is accurate. I don't know. It's very reassuring as a mega game designer if it is true, but
I feel that we're being told what they think we want to hear.
yeah, maybe.
I feel maybe it would be different results if we specified through the questions. Reading the materials counts if you just read, one of the 7 documents that you were sent. I'm not sure, but how do these numbers stack up in your experience, Rob?
Well, I want to let everyone know that there's no pass or fail mark for this survey. So if you say,
of course.
In the UK, there is a trope, as I assume may have developed in other regions, about, I'm not going to read the rules, or, was that in the rules? I didn't read them, whatever. And normally it's people joking around with each other, sometimes we hope. But I think a lot of people have come across instances where some people might not have been as well read through the rules as you would have hoped. And I think some of this comes down to how Megagames are organized, how you get the information out. Some of this is in the comments where someone says that they don't like being on a team with people they don't know because the people might not have read the rules. Obviously, people want to get a video or something beforehand of rules. Someone else mentions in the comments about the fact that Megagame rules are often poorly formatted and not always clear. And short of having some kind of standardization or rules templates which we can share, which not a terrible idea, but yeah, it's difficult to get that unified approach so that everyone can easily access the game materials. And as in, when I say access, I mean as in like read through, understand, because it's not just about the reading it, it's also about the understanding it. Because you can read through all the stuff and go, great, I've read 12 pages of game rules and 4 pages of background and a 2-page personal character objective. I can remember, I think, the part where it said I like apples. So, yeah. And because Megagames happen all in one go, you can't, there's not an ideal sort of easing in period, and you won't always be able to fully comprehend everything. So I think I believe that people look at a lot of the material. I don't know how much they'll always be taking in. I will have faith, and I will not doubt the survey results here. If you've said things, I definitely believe that you believe you've said these things.
We could always set up a test, like we put a DocuSign on the game rules. Next time you have to sign off that you've read it, and we see what percentage of people sign it.
I can already hear the argument starting on a WhatsApp.
Yeah. I like your comment about it being a bit of a trope, because I feel that some of the regulars in Sydney who have joked about this in the past, who said, I don't really read the rules, or I don't touch them until the game day. Originally I thought it was a joke, and then I'm more and more convinced that maybe it's not. But I think I guess another thing to read into here is that everyone learns really differently, and I think that comes through with all those comments that you've called out, Rob, about people's commentary on how game rules are written, the quality of them, the way they're presented, the format, videos, audio, that kind of thing, and anything that people designing and running these games can do to make those, to cover more ground in how people access the game documents, the better. But yeah.
Well, Johan from Gothenburg Megagames in Sweden has done some videos before, and I think those are really useful. I think Den of Wolves, John Myson's game, has lots of the stuff just laid out on the components. I think that's a great way of doing it. And I do think that sometimes people will have read the stuff, or they'll have looked at the stuff, but it doesn't always go in, and people don't always have the stuff available to them. They don't have the materials, the rules, the objectives on hand, because sometimes it's on your phone, and it's a faff when you're in the middle of something to find the right page in a PDF, and oh no, you've just accidentally opened the wrong PDF, and that was named something different. And by that time, someone's run off and stolen your resources for the year or whatever. So I think that there is something here where there might be a perception of people not always knowing the rules or certain information, and some of that could be that we do better at presenting it in game. But also, yeah, this is one that I will trust for the time being and hope that it is true.
Absolutely. Well, we might need to move through the next questions a little quickly, because we have run quite long. But so the next one is: have you ever run a mega game for reasons other than a recreational activity, like for educational, academic purposes, or training? And most people are playing, have answered no, 51%, and 23 saying no, but I would like to run it for educational training. I think in Australia, I haven't seen too many mega games with this kind of bent. Would you say it's fairly popular in the UK, or more so? Do these results kind of make sense to you, Rob?
This is almost 4 out of 5 of the responders, and if you're responding, then you're probably motivated to start with. So 4 out of 5 of the most motivated people are effectively, they're saying no, even if they would like to. In the UK, it's not necessarily common, but there are people who have put on games for all sorts of different reasons. And I am plugged into various networks that do these things. So yes, that this is a thing that happens, and it's one of the things that comes up around when someone says, "Oh, I want to try and make money off mega games," and everyone says, "Ha!" Because generally that's true. If you're doing recreational mega games, if you want to try and make some money off mega games, look at doing it for a corporate client, and that suddenly becomes a little bit different. But it's also tied up to business consultancy and things, and so you need extra skill sets on top of that. However, yeah, the fact that there's quite a few people who've said that they are using games for all of these other reasons is fantastic. I mean, in the other category, we've got a few people that answered around things about Blood on the Clock Tower or LARP, which is okay. That's adjacent. It's not quite what we meant here, but I'll allow it. I'm just quite happy about the fact that there are people doing these things for school-age kids or for academic purposes. or even team building and networking. I went to a team building and networking. I facilitated for a team building and networking mega game in September, and it was fun. It was great. There are lots of concepts and ideas and mechanics that you can put in front of people who don't really know about games, and they'll get into it. They might be a bit hesitant at first, and you will come up against a few people who are nofun.jpg, but generally, there are other ways to get mega games in front of people for non-recreational purposes, and as long as you're very clear about what that purpose is, whether it's education, training, team building, networking, if you've got that sorted, then they can be amazing tools for these things. So yeah,
Absolutely.
I'm happy that the numbers are actually quite so high for this, and I'm also happy that there's a lot of people who would like to run these things. So yeah,
Particularly the school age education is something that I'm particularly interested in trying to branch into. But I know that there are some people in the community down in Melbourne who have come to the mega game community from the more serious professional gaming sort of corporate consulting side
Yeah.
of things. And I think
Yeah.
that there's probably an even larger community in Australia doing it in corporate, in government, that just haven't attached to the mega game scene just yet. So I think the link is less there here in Australia as compared to the UK, but I'm sure they're out there.
Yeah, that's interesting. When we did Coalition of Chaos, the UK political mega game, it was a little bit of a busman's holiday for some of the people that attended, because we had people who did work for the Ministry of Defence or were various civil servants or resilience professionals who came along and then played adjacent roles to what they do as their day job, which was very interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, so serious purposes, mega games, absolutely love it. Very happy to help people with that. And probably about once every 2 or 3 months, I get an email from someone in a school or a university saying, mega games, how do I do them? And always happy to help with that.
So the next one is about how people find out information about mega games, which is pretty useful for marketing or getting word out about your mega game. I'm kind of surprised here that Facebook is the winner here at 55%. Facebook page or group run by a mega game group. As I kind of would have thought Facebook was on the way out. I don't know, just based on my personal biases, maybe, or just the experiences I've had. And then the next most common one is Discord at 48% and word of mouth at 48%, which does make a lot of word of mouth being the second does make a lot of sense. As in my experiences, those are pretty big ones. And no one answered X or Twitter. Is that right, Rob? Am I reading that graph right?
Globally,
Okay.
it equates to nothing. I think it means that in the UK region stats, we've got 1% answering Twitter. So it's technically a bit under 1%, but yeah, that's Excel rounding things up. So I think this is one of the most globally it's interesting, but I think this is going to be one of the things that varies most by region. Especially seeing how far down Instagram is, considering I know that there are several groups with Instagram, and I don't know if that will make anyone doubt the validity of it, but it's just fun to put reels up, isn't it? Anyway, I actually don't know. We EMM don't do that. Yeah, I was going to say Discord's interesting because at the moment there are many Discords, and Mega Game Maker's Facebook group used to be the hub for mega games, and people still post there, and it is still important. It's the biggest single, I guess, resource. There's over 2,000 people on it, but lots of the socials aren't anywhere near as active as they used to be. Occasionally you get good conversations in Discords, but they're not always thriving and fully active like some of the RPG or war games Discords I'm in, for example. And then, well, there are also a load of WhatsApp groups out there, which can be active to various degrees. But again, it feels as though a lot of it's fragmented, and at the moment we're trying to find our way to get information out to people. If anything, I'm surprised that not more people are getting emails from a Megagame group, because they're often infrequent, and yet they give you exactly the information that you probably want, need, or crave.
I think a lot of areas are in that same fragmented, where do we go now that these big platforms seem to be going in bad directions, what happens next kind of area. Yeah, it definitely feels like that's the vibe at the moment, at least in my spaces that I seem to frequent.
Yep, and we haven't yet broken. Well, that's not true. Becky, Becky Campbell Ladley has done some Megagame TikToks, which sort of went viral, which was great.
Mm.
In fact, East Midlands Megagames has got one of her TikToks on our front page, because it's about one of the games we ran, and that was really cool. And I think that she did a really good job with that. But I don't know how much otherwise people have been using TikTok, or how effective it is, because that's something I've not got TikTok. I've not looked at it. I know other people have and are thinking about it. Is that a way to get some more newer, younger players? Is that the best way to move, because things are going in that direction? Who knows? In 3 or 4 years, TikTok might be the biggest bar on this chart. But
Who knows?
until then, I think only one person mentioned it in other. So
Okay.
yeah.
Surely in the next few years we'll all be on Meta, Rob.
Yeah.
In the metaverse.
Yeah, you may very
It'll
well
be
be right.
beamed into our brains somehow, maybe. At least Megagamers now have officially you have permission to quit Twitter if you haven't already. There's no Megagame information there, so
Yeah,
Um,
there was briefly a small number of Megagame accounts on Twitter, and
right.
Mega Twitter just never really took off.
Mm.
Occasionally, actually, there's more stuff on LinkedIn about Megagames than there is on Twitter.
Wow, LinkedIn. Oh,
Maybe that's the move.
Where we mentioned it about the serious games. Yeah, there are people talking about serious gaming, and Megagames
that makes
comes up.
sense.
So, yeah.
Well, final question here. Megagame adjacent hobbies. Like, what other hobbies do people enjoy that are similar to Megagames? And board games are the, by far, well, not by far, but the biggest winner on this graph at 94%.
Absolutely dominant.
Followed by role-playing games at 80%, video games at 73%, and then it's quite a steep drop-off to war games at 40%, and then on to other related like live-action role-play, historical reenactment, and collectible card games, that side of things from there. Yeah, what do you guys think?
So I'm glad that nobody answered none. Everyone has something fulfilling they do beyond Megagames. So well done, you've all passed the survey. But I think I'm a little bit surprised that board games are quite so high. And again, I don't know if that's because the really keen beans who've answered this survey are the people who have board game evenings at their house. They go to their friendly local gaming store and are part of a board game social or whatever. I don't have information that will confirm or deny that. But yeah, I certainly know that a lot of people have come to Megagames through board gaming, and then I find that interesting because people overall are less keen on the mechanical elements. So what that's saying
Yeah.
to me, before breaking it down into regions, is that yes, we like board games. No, we're not coming to Megagames for board games. We want something different, and that's where the role-playing game element comes in, because 4 out of 5 Megagamers plays RPGs. And I think there would be something interesting in that, to try and find out what RPGs, in the same way what board games or what video games because obviously there's a world of difference between someone playing something like Sushi Go and Drang Austin or Twilight Imperium, or someone playing Call of Cthulhu or Cult, and then playing I don't know, what was I thinking of? The Jane Austen one, Good Society. Is that the one? But effectively, yeah, there's the one where you can play as sort of a lovely Pride and Prejudice comedy of errors with all sorts of delightful. Oh no! Oh, you dropped your handkerchief. How scandalous! And yeah, compared to my brain's dribbling out my ears because I've just withheld a Never Monster from Beyond Time. So there's lots of different genres in there, which I would love to extract, but for the time being, yeah, we can see what the main things are, and the main things that Megagamers do is gaming, which yeah, obviously
Very surprising.
there's quite a few things that I and a few other people who looked at this beforehand thought, yeah, those are reasonable to put on there. I'm sure there are going to be other hobbies which could also be seen as being adjacent, like cosplayers on there, because there are so many people that come to Mega Games in costumes, and I know some cosplayers who come to Mega Games and they have a great time. Same with live action role playing. When we did Last People on Earth, Celtic Britain, we had some LARPers turn up wearing their LARP stuff, which was sort of suitably Celtic. I'm actually surprised that the LARP number isn't higher, but again, I think that needs to be delved into with specific regions, because it might be that somewhere has a lot more LARPers than others. And I have done LARPs before, and I feel as though that there is enough shared DNA. Also, there's a
Definitely.
low-key discussion about whether Mega Games are a LARP or not, which again, yeah, that's a good pub conversation. And
Very
also the
much
play by
so.
email stuff. Over lockdown, certainly Tim Campbell Ladley ran a fantastic play by email game, which was based on the Kaiserreich universe, which is an alternative World War II where Germany won the First World War. And that really got a load of people interested, and it kickstarted some games, and some of those games fed into what has now become Omega. And that, I think, is really interesting because there are still people who are very, very keen on that. And in the comments, there's one person who even said, I'll die on the hill that play by email games are Mega Games. And that is an area of definitions that we can argue about some other time. But yeah, there are definitely some games which give the same kind of feel of depth, which I love, and I'm a big fan of play by email games. So
absolutely. Well, speaking of the comments, there's a huge volume of them here, so I don't think we'll be able to highlight any, unfortunately. There's a lot of interesting information. One of the comments I really like is has a lot of stuff about accessibility information being posted before the game, which is something we've talked about. We probably won't be able to highlight any of those because we should look at wrapping things up, I think. But Rob, what would you say coming out of this survey? What are your biggest takeaways, or is there anything that comes out of here that you really want to focus on for 2024?
I think that it's interesting to see there is a bit of regional difference, and I'm hoping that some of these elements are going to help inform groups how to do things in a way that players will appreciate. Because I do think that there is some stuff which is quick and easy that people can do. So things along the lines of, if you want to look at how to do a video, there are probably going to be people out there who will help you with that. And it doesn't have to be organ in depth. You can do a 2 or 3 minute video that just talks about this is the game and this is what it is, and then put a transcript on it. And all you need is you talking with a few slides of game components or relevant pictures, people will watch that. If you want to do something about rules, you could do a 2 or 3 minute video about a specific part of your game. People will probably watch that as well. That's a quick and easy thing to do. I say quick and easy. Making videos can actually take a little bit of time. But if we're looking at this now, that means that if you're running a game in September, you've got the time to look into it. Equally, I think just highlighting some things that people might not ordinarily think about along the lines of accessibility. So the fact that quite a high proportion of mega gamers would like some kind of accommodation. Yeah, think about it. Make sure that everyone can have fun without having to think about how close they are to the toilet or whether they need to sit down or something. There's so much stuff in the overall comments. Some of it is more regional specific. There is someone who I think there's more than one person who specifically talks about Gen Con. I would love to go to a Gen Con at some point, but probably not this year. And also stuff like, someone's mentioned traveling mega games. So stuff that can go around. That's on designers to get their games out there, because at the moment a lot of them are using license models. Sometimes people will travel with a game. So Johan, who I mentioned earlier, did come over to run Event Horizon for legal purposes, distinct from the film with the same name. But it was great to have him come over, and he sent the components over, and that was a traveling mega game, effectively. I mean, there's also people suggesting things around cost, and that's why I think that the ticket survey should run again if people are happy to do that. But there's also just so much enthusiasm and joy, and the fact that someone said we need to run a parallel Watch the Skies between Argentina and the UK. Yeah, that sounds great. Wide area mega games have happened 2 or 3 times, and they can be an absolute delight. They can be chaotic. You will be cursing the gremlins that live in your technology, but it's fun. And it's something big and different, because I think that's something that mega games need to also think about, which is, we know how we do things. Why don't we think about doing things a little bit differently and see how that works out? When we ran Den of Wolves and we made one of the press a wolf for EMM, that blew people's minds. That was a little thing, but yeah, people enjoyed it. Equally, I would love to see whatever weird and wonderful stuff that groups all across the world can come up with, because it might be that someone comes up with something that gets latched onto and becomes a new normal, that becomes, that was a great idea and we're going to take it because you are a genius. I'd just love to see more stuff like that. And some of that is around sharing ideas, which goes back to the whole thing around social media and how we share information, which isn't always super easy. But yeah, there's a lot of information, lots of details, some criticism, the fact that and this is actually something that got raised just before we started recording, so thank you for that, which was a lot of the questions here were reasonably positive. There wasn't anything that was too critical about mega games. So asking people what they didn't like, why might they not play something, what would make them not want to do something, and what do people think is poor value for money, or anything along those lines. And I think that's some of this is around effectively making sure that future surveys are as tight as possible. And I've already got 2 data scientist bods, that not actually data scientists, but better at data than I am, who have said that they'd be interested in helping out for next time. Because fundamentally, I don't really care if it's me that does this or not. I just rather that it exists so we can get the information. But yeah, it's just really good to see some people have put so much time and effort into very in-depth and I think useful information. Like, there's people talking about stuff to make games more accessible, and also just stuff that a lot of people will look at and go, "Yep, nope, that strikes me as sensible," or "I'm familiar with that." But also things around praising specific people or groups. Someone who said that they had a really good time at a Reading Megagame. Good. I'm glad. That's lovely to hear. Because we can spend a lot of time talking about some of the negatives. And yeah, it turns out that we're a bunch of nerds doing things for fun. So sometimes let's appreciate the fun bits.
And that's always been, I think, the crux of the feedback I've got after games. There's always a bit of critique in there, but at the end of the day, just about everyone has a great time and is always keen for more immediately. And I think that that's like my summary of the community. And I think we're pretty lucky to have a community that's so enthusiastic and supportive. Rob, I think this is probably a good time to wrap it. We've gone through a lot of ground here, and you've produced a huge amount of a very valuable data with this survey. I think there's a really great precedent set to continue it rolling through the years. And as you've hinted at throughout, and hopefully as is published at the same time as this recording, your insights will all be on the Megagame Assembly as a bit of a blog where people can read through them and analyze them. And
yes,
so if people do so and they're interested in helping you out with future surveys, or if they'd like to ask for more detail about any of the data that you got from it, how can people find you?
When the stuff is published on Megagame Assembly, which will be next week, we're currently on Saturday, 13th of January when recording this. So it will be from Monday onwards. My details will be on there. There will be a means to contact me. So if anyone wants to find out some more information, I'm not just going to give someone all of the survey numbers because that wasn't what I said. I wouldn't be sharing stuff, but for future surveys, we can think about how we digest it and play around with the numbers. But yes, I'm very happy to have conversations, try and dissect things in different ways, see if there's anything interesting about different elements of the survey and where they might match up with things. But it's been delightful to come on and have a chat with you about these things. It's nice to have a chat with some new people that I haven't chatted with about these things before. And I hope that people have got something vaguely useful out of my ramblings.
There's plenty of gold nuggets in there, I think. And likewise, Rob, thanks for coming along. Hopefully we'll be able to chat to you again.
Anytime. I'm going to make myself
Thank you so much.